Hello, I'm Olivia Mattis, greeting you on behalf of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. I'm so glad that you're spending part of your Sunday with us today. So thank you. We, for the last 5 years, have been running these programs on Sundays on beautiful stories of rescue, resistance, and hope. We usually focus on a great hero of the past. Well, guess what? Today we have a great hero of our day, and that is Efraim Zuroff. We're going to meet him soon. Today's program is about Efraim Zuroff and his work as, quote unquote, the last Nazi hunter. He's going to tell you some stories of some of these cases he was involved in. Our other speaker is Dr. Mordecai Paldiel, that you all know very well from all these programs that he's been on. He was for nearly 25 years the director of the Department for the Righteous at Yad Vashem. He's going to talk about cases that Yad Vashem considered of rescuers who were actually also perpetrators. Very strange cases that he's going to talk to you about, and he's going to explain how Yad Vashem handled such cases when he was in charge. I wanted to say that today is the final program of our wonderful intern from Austria. That's Emil Hafner. So Emil, wave to everybody. So I'm delighted that Emil has spent these last 10 months with us. He is the fourth intern that we've had. We have another one coming soon named Robin. And we are so glad that we partner with this program in Austria called Austrian Service Abroad, which sends young people to work in Holocaust education in place of their military service. What a great program that is, and we are honored to be selected as one of the organizations that they send these young people to. So thank you, Emil, for all your hard work. I also wanted to take this opportunity to mention my other colleague, Matthew Spurn, who is behind the scenes on all of these programs. Many of you have spoken with him on the phone, and he is indispensable to these shows that we've been running now for the last 5 years. So the way it's going to work is Mordecai Paldiel will make some introductory remarks. He will also introduce Efraim Zuroff, whom he's known for many, many years. Then Dr. Zuroff will give his presentation. When he's done, we will hear from Mordecai. Then I will make some announcements. Then we'll have audience questions and final thoughts at the end, as we usually do. As usual, you will be muted, so if you do have questions, please type them out into the chat box. I will be gathering them and posing them at the appropriate time. So thank you all for being here. Mordecai Paldiel, Dr. Paldiel, take it away, please.
Thank you, Olivia, and welcome, everyone. I am indeed truly honored, and it is with great pleasure to introduce Efraim Zuroff, a man known to me for some 40 years. In the early 1980s, while I headed a department at Yad Vashem dedicated to searching, identifying, and honoring non-Jewish persons who saved Jews from the Nazis, Efraim Zuroff at the same time launched a personal mission that would stretch decades to search, identify, and bring to justice persons, mostly, but not only Germans, but mostly of East European extraction, who collaborated with the Germans, not merely in some anti-Jewish acts, but in willingly participating in the killing of Jews, without necessarily German encouragement in all these cases. He has since made a name for himself in exposing the horrific deeds of these persons and in efforts to bring them to justice. Originally part of the US-based Office of Special Investigations, Efraim Zuroff switched working for the Wiesenthal Center, but in practice, continued working all by himself. I underline, by himself, since even the Israeli government and the Yad Vashem Institute, after the high-profile trials of Adolf Eichmann and Ivan Demjanjuk, labeled Ivan the Terrible, they dropped the search of other perpetrators and did not consider such an undertaking a high priority. But it was Zuroff who incidentally lost his maternal grandparents to Lithuanian perpetrators.
No. Not true. My great uncle, not my grandparents.
Okay, your great uncle named, I believe his name was Tsar, right?
Efraim Zuroff.
Efraim Zuroff. Well, Zuroff, thanks for the correction. Zuroff led a personal crusade to expose the deeds of these murderers who were still alive and were living quietly and peacefully in the United States, England, Canada, Australia, Argentina, and other places, far away from the places of their murderous crimes. To expose their terrible deeds and hold them accountable before the courts of justice. He has authored several books describing how he discovered the hideouts of these killers of Jews and his efforts to bring them to justice. He will tell us of some of these cases in which he was involved. Well, Efraim, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mordecai. Thank you for all your good work in trying to honor the rescuers, the non-Jewish rescuers who deserve to be remembered, deserve to be honored. So I'll briefly give you some information on three of the cases that I dealt with. One was the case of Laszlo Csátáry, who was a high officer of the Hungarian police in Hungarian occupied Slovakia. He was in charge of a ghetto in the city of Košice and played a major role in the mass deportation of the Jews, of 15,000 Jews of Košice to Auschwitz in 1944. He was a notorious sadist. He used to walk around with a whip and whip young girls, used to tell them to dig ditches and didn't even give them shovels. And he initially ran away after the war. He was what do you call it? He was convicted in absentia in Czechoslovakia and sentenced to death, but he had run away to Canada. And in Canada, they finally realized who he was and what he did. And when Canada changed the way that they were dealing with these Nazis, because originally they had passed a law with criminal prosecution, unlike the Americans who tried people for immigration and naturalization violations. He was stripped of his Canadian citizenship finally, and he ran away and he's disappeared. And one day I got a message from a woman who heard about our Operation Last Chance, which offered rewards, financial rewards for information. And she knew who he was and where he was living. And that information helped us convince the Hungarians to bring him to justice. One of the ironies of this case was that the Hungarians initially took their time and they weren't hurrying to prosecute him. That's him in front of the Budapest court. And but some journalists from the Sun newspaper in England were able to photograph him, and he came to the door in his underwear, and lo and behold, 2 days later, an indictment was submitted to the court. But unfortunately, Csátáry died and could not be punished for his crimes. I mean, the punishment was that he knew that he was going to be put on trial, and obviously he would pay for it. A second case is probably the case most important to me. It's the case of one of the commandants of one of the worst Nazi, not Nazis, Ustasha, Croatia fascist concentration camps called Jasenovac. And the estimate of the number of victims of Jasenovac was between 90 and 130,000. Not a single German or Austrian served in Jasenovac. It was all done by the Croatians, done in the most horrible way. Used to slash open the stomachs of pregnant women, take out the fetus, kill the mother. They used to tie people back to back, put them on a huge, very high tower and throw them into the Sava River. They were actually in the midst of what was three genocides of the Serbs, the Jews, and the Roma. And they also, of course, wanted to murder their Croatian anti-fascists, the real heroes actually against them. And we found him in Argentina. He was sent there by there were actually two networks who sent people to South America. One was run by a Croatian priest, Pronoslav Dragonovic. He was living in Santa Teresita. We sent Jorge Camarasa, an Argentinian journalist, to Belgrade to meet with some of the few survivors of Jasenovac. He went knocking on Šakić's door. Šakić opened the door, and Camarasa said, "Are you Dinko Šakić?" He said, "Yes." Now, normally, when Nazis are confronted, it's not me, mistaken identity, or it's me and I didn't do it. Not Dinko Šakić. Dinko Šakić was very proud of what he did. And when Camarasa took a TV crew into his house and to ask him a few questions, he said, "I would do it again if I had a chance. The problem with Jasenovac was that we didn't finish the job." What does that mean? Murder all the Serbs, all the Jews, all the Roma in the territory of the independent state of Croatia. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. And in the funeral, the priest said that it's true that Dinko Šakić didn't observe all the 10 commandments. You'll excuse me if I interject that means don't murder, but he's a symbol for Croatia. And that's where we still have those problems in Croatia, where there's tremendous Holocaust distortion. Third case is the case of Alexandras Laleikis, who was the head of the Saugumas, the Lithuanian police who guarded the Vilna ghetto. He was responsible for taking the Jews to be killed in Ponar, the mass murder site of the Jews of Vilna, including apparently my great uncle, his wife, and his 2 boys. In any event, Laleikis ran away to the United States, and it took a relatively long time to find documents that could prove his involvement in sending Jews to Ponar. They finally, Michael McQueen was the historian. They finally found the evidence, and they stripped Laleikis of his U.S. citizenship. But the people in the Office of Special Investigations were afraid that he would not be able. They couldn't kick him out of the United States, which is the most that could be done. But we found a way here to convince people that Israel was seriously trying to extradite him, and Israel has a death penalty for the people. So next thing you know, Laleikis ran away to Lithuania, was put on trial, was not forced to go to the trial. He once appeared in the courtroom, and instead of reading him the indictment, the Lithuanians asked him, "Well, what do you have to say, Mr. Laleikis?" He said, "I did it all for my country," and he had a heart attack on the spot, and he died.
Wow, what a story. So,
by the way, Israel was not seriously considering extraditing him, but that's what they told the reporter from the Boston Globe. And he believed it, that jerk.
All right. So, Mordecai, go ahead and tell us your story.
Yes, as a follow-up of what Efraim said, I thought at this point, you know, we had a big trial of Ivan Demjanjuk. He was extradited to Israel. And it turned out at the beginning he was found guilty. Then it went to the Israeli Supreme Court, and they overturned the district court because they felt that maybe there was another man who was labeled as Ivan the Terrible and not Demjanjuk. So I think it didn't end so well in Israel because the Supreme Court had freedom. He went back to the United States, and then he went to Germany, and they tried him because he was a guard at Sobibor. But I want to talk about Yad Vashem's program of Righteous Among the Nations. I just want to mention at the start, Yad Vashem has some of the criteria for honoring someone as a righteous among the nation or a righteous Gentile is a person who saved Jews at the risk of his own personal risk of his life or safety. Now, a person who was known to be an anti-Semite but did nothing against the Jews, he could be included as a righteous among the nations. A person who politically was a fascist, but there's nothing in his record that he did anything to harm Jews or any other persons, he could also be considered as a righteous among the nations. If there is evidence about him, and when he rescued Jews, he was playing with his own life. He put his own life on the line. So now I want to say of two cases which really troubled Yad Vashem for many, many years, especially the first case. The first case is of a bishop in Lvov. Lvov, today it's called Lviv. It was once part of Poland, today it's Ukraine, but he was a Ukrainian, and he was a bishop of a church, the Union Church, which was an offshoot of the Catholic Church, but they had different rights than the major Catholic Church, and he was a very staunch and proud Ukrainian nationalist, and he felt that Ukraine could, and he was anti-communist, of course, and Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. And so when Germany attacked the Soviet Union, he felt that here is an opportunity for Ukraine to gain independence, finally, under the aegis of Germany. And therefore, it was important for Germany to win the war. And he called upon the Ukrainians to help Germany win the war. He was not a Nazi, of course, but he felt that if Germany wins the war, there's a chance for Ukraine to obtain independence and the defeat of communism. Now, on the side, he also saved Jews. Up to 150 Jews were saved. Some of them in his own house, in his own church. And one of them is a rabbi who was on the Commission of the Righteous of Yad Vashem, Rabbi David Kahane. Here he is on the right. Rabbi David Kahane was hidden in the library of his church. He knew him from before the war. They had very friendly relationships. Rabbi Kahane was hidden there, and his wife and daughter were hidden by Sheptitsky in one of the monasteries and convents that he headed. But he called on his people to help the Germans, and later on, in 1944, as the Russians were taking the upper hand and advancing, he helped create a division, an SS division made up of Ukrainians, called the Galicia Division, in order to stem the Russian advance, while he was hiding Jews in over 100 Jews, some say 100, some say 150. So after the war, Rabbi David Kahane, who was a member of the Commission of the Righteous, and for a time before that, he was also chief rabbi of Argentina after the war. He pleaded for Yad Vashem to honor Sheptitsky, who died in 1944, at the end of 44, as a righteous among the nations. The discussions lasted 30 years in the commission. There were opinions for even historians like Yisrael Gutman was for and he stated that the law doesn't say a person who was politically involved in anything, even pro-German, is therefore canceled. If he saved that many Jews and he risked his life, because if the Germans had found out about this, although he was a collaborator, he was not a perpetrator, but a collaborator, but for political reasons, not for any ideological reasons, well, he should be honored by Yad Vashem. And those who were opposed, they said, how can we honor a person who called for collaboration with Nazi Germany? And then himself was involved in the creating of an SS division of Ukrainians. How can we honor him and have a tree for him at Yad Vashem? As Dr. Arad, the head of Yad Vashem, stated, imagine that we honor Sheptytsky and we have a tree for him. And all the Ukrainians who participated in the murder of Jews, all the Ukrainians who were collaborators, they would come from the United States and Canada and hold a nice ceremony around the tree of Sheptytsky at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. How will this look for Yad Vashem? So Yad Vashem decided 3 times not to honor him. Why 3 times? Because each time there were appeals from various persons to honor him, to make an exception, because he did save many Jews. And the final, after so many debates and counter debates, the decision stayed that he could not be honored as a righteous among the nations. And Rabbi David Kahana died brokenhearted because he felt that this man, and he wrote about this, he wrote a book called the Lvov Ghetto Diary, which was, he wrote it in Hebrew, translated in English, where there's a whole chapter on Sheptytsky, which he considered a saint. Very strange case. This case of Bishop Andrei, or Metropolitan, his title was Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky. Today, he's considered a national hero, one of the founding fathers of independent Ukraine, and many streets are named after him. The second story is also of a person who can be considered a collaborator, Jean-Marie Moussi. Here you have the picture of him, a former president of Switzerland who was a sympathizer of fascism, although not a fascist, but he felt fascism, especially the Italian style, the style of Mussolini, was appropriate because it created order and discipline, and that's what the society needed. So he made trips to Germany, he met with Himmler before the war, and he felt that even Nazi Germany, although he was not a Nazi, of course, but he felt the greatest danger threatening civilization was Bolshevism, communism, and that had to be stopped. And there's no one else who could stop them except Nazi Germany and its attack. So therefore, although he was not a Nazi, he called for Nazi Germany to win the war. He was in Switzerland. In 1944, and a very strange story indeed, every time I think about it, Recha Sternbuch, a Jewish woman, originally born in Antwerp but living in Switzerland, and she headed an organization, she represented the organization, the rabbinic organization, the rescue community, Vada Salah. Efraim knows a lot about this, he wrote a lot about this. She herself was a religious person in Switzerland, and she got in touch with Jean-Marie Moussi with the following unimaginable idea. You are close to Himmler, the head of the SS. Germany is losing the war, and Himmler knows that. Why don't you go and see Himmler, and we'll pay you for the trip, and tell Himmler the only way to stop Germany from losing the war is to split the alliance fighting against Germany, especially the United States. Get the United States out of the war. But how are you going to do it? Start liberating Jews from the concentration camps, that you are in control. That'll change your image. And then you can negotiate with the United States. Actually, you'll be negotiating with the Jews, because according to the Nazi thinking, the Jews were in control of the United States. And these Jews will then make it possible for the United States to get out of the war because the United States has no interest in Europe. And Mursi in 1944 regretted his pro-fascist leanings and so on. And with the Vaad Hatzalah, headed by Recha Sternbuch, paying for his trip, he called Himmler and he said, I have to see you. And Himmler said, come over. And in October 44, he met with Himmler in his private train, someplace in Poland. The Germans were still in parts of Poland. And he came up with the idea of Himmler, you can save Nazi Germany from being overrun by Russia, from communism, but you got to free the Jews. And Himmler said, okay, how many Jews? And Mursi said, how about starting with 100,000 Jews? And Himmler said, it's an idea. I like that. But are you sure that you can get America out of the war? It was the first try, Mursi said. And Himmler told Mursi, okay, it's between us, but I don't want the Führer to know about it because he'll be furious. And Mursi came back and told to Sternbuch, Himmler has agreed in principle, but I have to meet with him again to talk out of the details. He met with him again after a few months, and Himmler told Walter Schellenberg, his private aide, the head of the SD, the Sicherheitsdienst, which is the SS, the SS intelligence service, to prepare a first train of 1,200 Jews from Theresienstadt and move them to Switzerland. Mursi assured Schellenberg that as a former president of Switzerland, he would make it possible for the Jews to be admitted in Switzerland. And that first train moved into Switzerland in February 1945. And Schellenberg was preparing another train and several other trains. But then there was a man in the SS establishment called Kaltenbrunner, who he was in charge of the camps too. And he slipped the information to Hitler. And Hitler became furious when he heard about this. And he said, anyone who negotiates with the Allies and says, put him up against the wall and shoot him even without a trial. Himmler took fright. And he said, I'm no longer involved in this. Okay, I sent you 1,200 Jews, and that's it. But I'm willing to work, again, for the liberation of the Jews of the concentration camps in another way. I'm willing to go to Berlin and talk with Schellenberg that the concentration camps should be turned over to the Allies when they would advance inside Germany and not be liquidated as Hitler had ordered, that the concentration camps can only be surrendered when all the prisoners are killed. And so he traveled several times in Germany, Jean-Marie Mursi, and according to credible reports, he managed to convince some of the concentration camp via Schellenberg not to kill the prisoners like in Buchenwald and Bergen-Belsen, but to hand over the prisoners to the Allies upon liberation. There's more details on the story that I can't go into. One of the persons that worked with Recha Sternbuch, okay, he was head of the silo company in Israel, which imported grain, and he pleaded with Yad Vashem to honor Jean-Marie Mursi, who was not a Nazi. He was sympathetic to fascism. But he went out and he met with Himmler, and he tried to get Himmler to agree to the idea of freeing Jews from concentration camps, and therefore getting maybe America out of the war. So he pleaded with Yad Vashem, and again, the commission debated that, and finally came to the conclusion that we cannot honor such a man, because it would be a farce that we honor the man that negotiated with Himmler and was close with Himmler. And maybe somebody, if we honor Jean-Marie Mursi, someone will come and say, how about honoring Himmler? Because he worked behind Hitler's back and he freed a trainload of 1,200 Jews. And then he, in principle, he was ready to free more Jews. So the story of Jean-Marie Mursi has been written, and there were some people who pleaded with Yad Vashem that he was, after all, he was not a Nazi. He was a Swiss person. He was religious, Catholic. He liked fascism. He didn't harm any Jews. And he caused the liberation of at least a trainload of 1,200 Jews. And Yad Vashem decided, no, we cannot honor such a person, because this is collaboration, which went a little bit too far. Collaboration, he was very close to the Nazi and the SS establishment. So I mentioned 2 cases. There were other cases which didn't go that far as this, and some of them were honored by Yad Vashem, although they had some form of collaboration with Nazi Germany. So these, I mentioned 2 cases, principal cases of collaborators, not perpetrators, but they collaborated because of their political orientation, not ideological. And Yad Vashem declined to declare them as righteous among the nations. Okay, although in both of these cases, they saved Jews, many Jews. Okay, so that's about it. So now I'm turning the floor back to Olivia. She wants to make some announcements. Olivia, take it.
Okay, boy, two presentations chock full of so much information. We have questions for both of you. I will be asking them of you in just a few minutes. Right now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we have upcoming here at the Sousa Mendes Foundation. While I'm doing that, please continue, audience members, to add your questions to the chat box. I'm sure you have many. So today is our last program of our spring season. We are now going to take a break until July 27th. The reason for the break is I'm heading to Portugal to co-teach a workshop for teachers, American teachers and Portuguese teachers, about our hero, Sousa Mendes, about rescue and resistance during the Holocaust, about the history of Portugal and the Jews, and so much more. It'll be a fascinating workshop that will be in residence at the new Aristides de Sousa Mendes Museum in his house in Portugal. Dr. Paldiel will be one of the guest speakers joining us via Zoom, and I'm super excited to be going to Portugal for this first ever. It's our pilot teacher workshop. So our next program is once I'm back in America, we will have a program on July 27th on the very important story that we have not yet covered of Denmark. The unique story in the annals of Holocaust rescue about the Danish rescue, not of 100% of the Jewish community, but 95%. So that's pretty good compared to other countries. We are going to have the World's Authority from Denmark, who has written about the story. We also have a survivor who was born in Copenhagen, who will tell us his story. And we have the curator from the Museum of Jewish Heritage, who has put together an unbelievable exhibit that you all have to see. If you live in the New York area, or if you come to New York, you must go to Battery Park, to the Museum of Jewish Heritage, to see their exhibition about the rescue of the Jews of Denmark. It's up for 5 years, which is crazy for a temporary exhibition. That's incredible, 5 years. So you have plenty of time to go see that, and I urge you to do so. So we have the person in charge of that, the curator. So that's what's coming up on July 27th. We're putting a link in the chat box for you to sign up. It is a free program. That brings us into August. We have 2 programs in August. I'm only going to tell you about one of them, which is August 17th. We have a book launch of this new book, which is called Cartoonists Against Racism, The Secret Jewish War on Bigotry. And it tells about how the American Jewish Committee during World War II and after commissioned cartoonists to make cartoons against racism, against anti-Semitism, basically to make the United States a safe place for the Jewish community. And now that we're going through a terrible period of anti-Semitism, we know what it means for Jews to not feel safe in America. But so the American Jewish Committee commissioned these cartoonists. It's a whole book that's chock full of these cartoons, wonderful cartoons. This is a great gift for a young person in your life or for yourself. And so we have it available. The program is free, but we are selling these books signed and inscribed by the author. So please order your own copy or a copy for everyone you know, and let us know how it should be inscribed and to whom. So those are my announcements, and now we'll get to your questions. So, question for Efraim Zuroff. Have you ever worked in any capacity with two other guests that we've had on our program? And I'm referring to Serge and Beate Klarsfeld in Paris.
God. No, with a capital N. They don't appreciate me, and I have no desire to work with them.
Can you elaborate?
Listen, people who hunt Nazis apparently have big egos. So there's a lot of competition. And to be perfectly honest, the Klarsfelds dealt only with cases that were in France and not nowhere else. And they did, listen, I'm not saying that they didn't do the right thing. They did the right thing, and they worked very hard. But they got angry at me for saying that Chatteri was the most wanted Nazi war criminal. Why? I don't know why. Because they didn't catch him. That's it. That's why they were upset that he was number one. You understand? So with people like that, there's no cooperation.
Can I ask you about, can you say something about your work together with Simon Wiesenthal himself?
First of all, Simon, by the time that I met Simon Wiesenthal, he was already quite old, and he wasn't, being very active, but he was very supportive of Operation Last Chance and some of the decisions that we made regarding where to start. For example, we started in the Baltics, in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And he was happy that we were continuing what he wanted to do. And listen, he was a one-man show. He never named an heir. And like I said, the people who hunt Nazis have big egos.
Okay, question for Mordecai. You talk about controversial cases. You didn't mention the most famous one. Someone's asking about that in the audience. Tell us about the controversy about honoring Oskar Schindler.
Oh, that was very controversial. When I worked at Yad Vashem, and I found out that no one else at Yad Vashem knew that. No one. That Oskar Schindler, although he had planted a tree, but he was not declared a righteous among the nations for many years. But how come he planted a tree? Because he planted a tree in 1962 before Yad Vashem had created a commission headed by Justice Moshe Landau, who tried Adolf Eichmann. And that commission then created certain criteria. Oskar Schindler had already planted a tree. But then when his case came for consideration for the title itself, Justice Landau, Moshe Landau, put his foot down, and he said there are two Jewish persons who came before us and said that Oskar Schindler stole our property, which is the factory producing pots and pans, and the outlet in Krakow, which sold the pots and pans. He took over their property. He became the owner. And he did it, he used violent methods. He brought in people to beat up the Jewish owners to sign a certain document in which they would turn over the property. That was in 1939 and 1940. That's before he became a rescuer. That's before he started employing Jews in his factories and so forth and so forth and so forth. and then sent him to Moravia, to Brunelitz, and so forth. They came before the committee and said, how can you honor a person like that, who caused pains to my family? And so there was a committee session in 1963, and some people were in favor. He had already planted a tree, all right? That's before the commission was created. And there were several sessions. And finally, it was to come to a vote, because the commission works on the principle of vote. If there's a majority in favor, then the person is recognized. If there's a majority against, the person is not recognized. And based on the opinions expressed before the vote, Moshe Lando, Justice Moshe Lando, said, I see from the opinions expressed that the vote will be in favor of his recognition. So I want to announce, if indeed he is recognized, I will no longer be able to stay in the commission as president of the commission. So everybody fell silent. And then the head of the Yad Vashem, Aryeh Kubovi, said, we're not going to vote. We can't allow Justice Moshe Lando to resign because of a German, of Oskar Schindler, although he saved so many Jews. But the decision was to send him a letter. And in the letter it would state that according to information that we received, we did all these good things to the Jews and so on and so on. And those people that you helped and saved, they are entitled to honor you and to salute you. That's in the letter. And on the same day, a second letter. According to some information received, there are certain things that happened when you were in Krakow, certain things which are very unpleasant. We're not going to go into detail. We just want you to know about this. Signed by Moshe Lando, both letters. And he went back to Germany. And when he died, he was buried in Jerusalem. And then later on, Spielberg in 1991 came to Israel to finish the last shots of the film, Schindler's List, on the tomb of Schindler, who was buried on Mount Zion in the Catholic cemetery. And the Schindler Juden, anyway, those people who were saved by him, then came to me and said, Dr. Paldiel, you know, Oskar Schindler is a righteous among the nation. How about his wife, Emily? She also helped him, especially in the Brunelitz phase. So I didn't tell them Oskar Schindler has not even been declared a righteous. So I went to Moshe Beisky, who then was the head of the commission, and he was one of the persons saved by Schindler. And I said, Justice Beisky, we got a problem. They want to honor Emily Schindler, but Oskar Schindler has not yet been fully honored, although he has a tree. So Moshe Beisky then gathered the commission and told them, oh, there was some kind of bureaucratic administrative thing back in 1993, which caused Oskar Schindler not to be honored. He never received a medal, never received a certificate of honor, but he had planted a tree. So now let's roll it up and also honor Emily. And in 1991, he was honored, and my job was to remove the sign next to his tree, which said Oskar Schindler, and change it to Oskar and Emily Schindler. And so nobody knew at Yad Vashem that Oskar Schindler had not been formally declared a righteous. I discovered that where? Of all places, in the archives of Yad Vashem. When I dug up the archives of the debates of the commission of 1963 in November, I discovered that the decision then was not to honor him. And I just want to add, a few years later, after 1963, MGM came in contact with Yad Vashem. We want to make a film of Oskar Schindler. And Yad Vashem said, well, there was a problem with Oskar Schindler. We have some other names, maybe we want to suggest for a film. And MGM dropped the whole idea. So MGM was about to make a film of Oskar Schindler in the 1970s, but Yad Vashem was not in favor because he had not been recognized. That's a letter by Kubovi to MGM. So Spielberg didn't know that when he made a film of Oskar Schindler. He didn't know that Oskar Schindler was not yet formally a righteous among the nation, but he had a tree there, and people came before the tree and took photos of him.
Question for Efraim. Someone in our audience is mentioning the age of these perpetrators, who by now in 2025, I suppose, are 100% dead, right? We're talking about your work from 10 years, 20 years ago. But even so, she says, well, why focus on people who are, you know, in the last years of their life? Wouldn't the focus be better spent elsewhere? And I know that you have strong feelings about that. So explain your feelings about prosecuting aging perpetrators.
Okay, first of all, the fact that someone manages to avoid being prosecuted doesn't turn a perpetrator into a righteous Gentile. And these trials are very important lessons for society, especially the societies in which these people were raised and in which they operate. So you know, listen, they murdered people who are older than they are now. So what do you say to that? They had no mercy on the Jews they murdered, many of them elderly Jews. Why let them go? I mean, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
Of all the countries that you dealt with, which ones were obstructionist and which ones were helpful?
Well, practically every single one was obstructionist, to be perfectly honest. Listen, let me explain something. Until 2008, in order to prosecute a Nazi war criminal, you had to prove three things. One is that he committed a specific crime, he or she committed a specific crime, okay? You had to know the name of the victim. In other words, if they said that he had pushed Landau into the gas chamber and it was really Rosenbaum, they lost the case. And the motivation, in other words, and the stimulus was racial hatred. Go prove that 40 years later. So two wonderful lawyers from the Central Office for the Clarification of Nazi War Crimes in Ludwigsburg, the Zentralstelle, in other words, that's the central office, which have to vet all those cases, okay, went to their boss and said, why are you bringing these people up for murder? Put them on trial for accessory to murder, and that way you don't have to fulfill all these three almost impossible things to prove. And we had eight trials after 2008. The first one, by the way, was Demjanjuk. He was the president. He was convicted of the murder of 28,000 Jews in Sobibor, and he appealed the verdict. Now there were two problems with the cases in Germany. One was that in Germany you don't go to jail until your appeal is over. Not a single one of those people who were convicted, all 7 of them, only one was stopped for medical reasons. So all of them were convicted, and all of them appealed. But the appeals drag on, and none of them were finished before they could be the people could be sent to trial, sent to jail. But despite that, listen, you got to understand something. Any single trial here makes the other people who know that they're guilty worried, ruin their lives, which is exactly what we can do if we can't bring them to justice. And it's a lesson for the younger generation, and it's something that was done and should have been done. In other words, there were thousands. If that change that they made in 2008 had been implemented in 1950, thousands of people could have been brought to justice who weren't brought to justice.
I would like to add another story, not Oskar Schindler, but of a well-known anti-Semite who was honored by Yad Vashem as the righteous among the nations. It's a woman. Her name is Sofia Kosak-Schutzka. Before World War II, she was a very frum, another very Catholic frum, and she wrote articles against the Jews in Polish newspapers. And she stated the following: the Jews don't belong in Poland. They don't practice the Catholic religion. They have different attitudes. They have different behaviors. They eat different foods, different dress. These very religious Hasidic Jews. There's nothing in common between the Jews and Polish society. And they harm Polish society by their presence here. And they should get out. And we should pass laws to make them get out of Poland. That was her position. Then came the German occupation. And in 1942, she joined the Polish underground and she issued a manifesto. And in the manifesto, she said, what I said about the Jews, I haven't changed my mind. But what is happening now is murder. And I'm a Catholic. And we cannot stand by and allow this to happen. The Jews have a right to live, although I don't like them. So we have to do something to aid them. And that was a manifesto of the underground. And then she went ahead and she created a secret organization called Żegota. She launched Żegota. That's a secret organization founded by the Polish underground to help Jews on the run. And they helped, the figures are not certain, but it runs into the thousands, Jews who had escaped from the ghettos. At the end of the war, she wrote another article in which she said, I turn now to the Jews. We helped you as much as we could to survive, and we risked our lives. Now the war is over. You don't belong in Poland. So please get up and leave and go any place else that you wish, but not in Poland. You are not Polish. There's nothing with you identical with Polish ambitions. So please leave. And Yad Vashem honored her as a righteous among the nations. She, incidentally, she also sheltered a Jewish person in her own home, on top of creating this organization called Żegota. But I want to say something to Zuroff. I smiled when I read the following passage in your book on page 215. The book that I read about what's the name of the book?
Which book?
Operation Last Chance.
Okay.
Okay, so listen to that. This is what Efraim Zuroff says. For several years, terrible stomach aches with no relief in sight. A case of work-related nervous anxiety. You had stomach aches. And then one day, you found out that one of the persons you were looking for, a man by the name of Kipiro, lived opposite the synagogue in Budapest. And then you stated, my unbearable stomach pains suddenly disappeared. So I thought it was very
So, what's so strange about that?
I mean, what was the stomach aches that you had all these years?
No, my concern was that I was afraid that Capiro, given his age, could not be taken to be put on trial. Now, Capiro was one of the officers responsible for the murder of 1,200 Jews, Serbs, and Roma in the city of Novi Sad and its environs. Okay, and he later ran away to Argentina. He and all those officers, by the way, this was not authorized by the Hungarian High Command. This was January 21st to 23rd. A light plane landed on the ice of the Danube with officers got out from Budapest and said, what the hell are you doing? Stop the murders, okay? So, and these people were put on trial in 43 and 44, and they were all convicted, okay? Then what happened in March 19th, 44, the Nazis came. So the Nazis came and put pressure on the Hungarians to cancel the convictions. Then after World War II was over, when the communist regime came in, they again were convicted, but Capiro had already run away to Buenos Aires. And then in 1994, 96, he went into the Hungarian embassy in Buenos Aires and asked them if he could go home. And they said, yeah, welcome, welcome. I don't know how to say it in Hungarian. Okay, so we found him. We found him living. He was living opposite a functioning shul in Buda, and he was in good health. And I was helped by two young teachers who were members of the Faith Church with the Hungarian translations. And I saw a lady walking out of his apartment building, and I told the two people from the Faith Church, one woman, one man. I told the woman, get a hold of that lady and find out what's Capiro's health. Okay? So she went and she spoke to her, and she spoke to her, and she spoke to her. And I was going crazy. And it turns out he was in great shape. So that meant that he could be put on trial. And he was put on trial, but the Hungarian prosecution, apparently they made some sort of deal, because Capiro had sued me for libel, and they acquitted me, and they acquitted him by saying that no evidence presented to the court in 1943 can be used in this trial. But apparently the prosecutor built his whole case on that. So the judge says Capiro is not innocent, but the prosecution didn't prove his guilt. So the prosecution appealed, and before the appeal could be finished, he croaked, and he got a nice little funeral from Jobbik. Jobbik is the Hungarian fascists.
Wow. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the hour. We could be here for many hours more, but it is time for some final remarks. There is a question that I want to get in there to Efraim Zuroff, which is, how do you choose the people to focus on? And did you always choose people who were high level, or did you sometimes choose people who were lower down? How did you make these decisions? And what else would you like to say in closing to our audience today?
I'd like to say hello to my cousin Manfred Rothstein, for number one. Listen, it's a matter of what's possible. We pick, in other words, we'll try and bring anybody that we think we have solid evidence to court to see to it that they're convicted and punished. And but I have to say that the thing is so difficult, because if there's no political will to bring these people to justice, there's not going to be any trials. And the majority of the places, like I'll give you an example. In Canada, they did a horrible job. In Britain, only one conviction. In Australia, 3 trials, no convictions. I mean, we fought tooth and nail to get these countries to pass the laws to enable prosecution. They all passed the laws, but it didn't come to really multiple results, and it's a shame. But why? For example, the British government, the Crown Prosecution team, refused to hire Jews, for example. They were afraid that Jews were prejudiced. And then they cried that their results were not very impressive.
Wow.
And by the way, the House of Lords, the Lords 3 times voted against the law, but they couldn't, the third time they could not, it didn't matter. Each time that the bill was taken before the House of Commons, we were winning each time by a larger margin. And by the time, the third time that it was presented to the House, it got a huge margin to pass it. And then when the House of Lords rejected it, they couldn't do it because the third time is worthless for them. And that's how we got the bill passed. But what they did, I'm telling you, they insisted that they find a witness who can see that the person committed a murder. Listen, if someone served in the Ares Commando in Latvia, I can promise you that they were busy murdering Jews. Okay, but they had to find someone who saw these people from this Ares Commando, or the Lithuanian 12th Battalion, which was sent to Belarus, and they murdered 20,000 Jews. in Belarus. And one of the officers, Antanas Gekas, was in Scotland, and we tried to bring him to justice. and there were people from that unit, and we knew from the Soviet, he was tried by the Soviets. He was convicted, and they said that after the shooting was over, he used to go around the pits to see if, God forbid, someone was still alive, so he killed them. In other words, he shot them with his pistol. But no one was willing to go to testify without immunity for them. They were murderers too.
Wow.
I'm telling you, it's almost an impossible task. There are few heroes here, I'm telling you.
Mordecai, we're talking today, I think, about justice. I think that's the main topic we've been talking about. Justice from in terms of recognition from Yad Vashem, justice in these courts, which even if it's not achieved, it's still being pursued, and that in itself is an achievement. Mordecai, what would you like to say to our audience in closing about all of these stories?
Well, I'll make it very brief. Let's see what I have to say. What comes to my mind is we of the post-Holocaust generation, we need to study and ponder the several facets of human behavior during times of tyrannical persecutions, namely the bystanders, the perpetrators, and the humanitarians. I was privileged to be involved in learning of persons from all walks of life who, for reasons not even known to them, risked their lives to save Jews from their murderous oppressors. My friend Efraim Zuroff felt the need to bring to light those who chose a different path of staining their hands with the blood of innocent Jews. We all are free to choose the one or the other. Efraim has shown us how persons, many of whom, with wives and children of their own, chose to be murderers, even with little encouragement by others, while I have shown how others chose to be humanitarians, even at great risk to their lives. These two extreme examples of human behavior ought to be a lesson to us, to discourage and repress one type of behavior while encouraging and promoting the other type. This remains an ongoing challenge. We dare not fail, for the future of civilized life is at stake. Thank you.
Boy, is it ever.
Listen, let me add Olivia, let me add something.
Please.
One of the inspirations that I got was a story that Simon Wiesenthal told me when I first met him. And that is, Simon was an architect. He could have had a wonderful career. He's very talented, by the way, artistically, and he could have had a fantastic practice as an architect in Europe, which was destroyed. So many buildings were destroyed, etc. Anyway, he told the following story. He was invited to a fellow survivor, sitting for a Shabbos meal or something like this, and the guy asked Simon, "No, what are you doing with your life?" So Simon said to him, "Listen, I'm not very religious, but I do believe in the world to come." Okay, and when the survivors meet the victims will immediately ask the survivors, "No, you were the lucky ones. What did you do with your life?" So Simon says, one will say, "I was a lawyer, I was a teacher, I smuggled American cigarettes in the DP camps." I'll say, "I didn't forget you. And I never forgot them and never will forget them." And that's gave me the impetus of really fighting as hard as I can. Now, you have to remember one thing. Even these people are punished, even if they're not convicted. And one of the things that is most difficult for them is that their families find out what they did. Most of them have no idea. So I'll tell you one little story. I found this guy who had murdered an 18-year-old Jewish boy who they caught without a yellow star in Budapest. And he knew he was Jewish because they lived in the same neighborhood. So they took him to their barracks, they murdered him, and they threw the body into the Danube. Anyway, so they brought me the evidence, and I went looking for him, and I found him through the International Tracing Service in Australia, but I didn't know what his state of his health was. So I made a deal with Channel 9. They staked out the house, and the guy comes out, goes into his car, and drives off. Hallelujah! It means he's well enough to be put on trial. So anyway, when he came back, they were waiting for him. And they said, "Oh, the Wiesenthal Center says that you're a Nazi war criminal." Blah 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 blah. And at the end, they said before he was put on television, "Is there anything else, Mr. Zente?" His name was Charles Zente, Hungarian NCO, and he said, "Yeah," and he's about to be revealed on national television. He said, "Yes, don't tell my family."
Wow. My goodness. Well, I feel like I'm in the presence of greatness with both of you. You have both devoted your lives to very, very noble work. And on behalf of all of our audience, I would like to thank you both. And our audience, we will see you for the Denmark program in a little over a month, July 27th. And then don't forget to get your own copy of this wonderful book. In the meantime, have a nice rest of June and most of July. See you July 27th. Be well, everybody. Take care. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
If anybody's interested, I wrote 4 books, all on the Holocaust, and they can find them on Amazon.
Sounds good. Please order Dr. Zuroff's books. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.